Yesterday, September 1st, 2025, history was written in Tianjin, China. Picture the scene. Red carpets rolled out, photographers flashing from every angle, and the world's gaze fixed on three of the most powerful men alive: Vladimir Putin of Russia, Narendra Modi of India, and Xi Jinping of China. This wasn't just another international summit, not just another handshake for the cameras. What unfolded was far more symbolic. An unmistakable sign that the balance of power in the global economy is shifting before our very eyes. Imagine the images you've probably already seen. Putin and Modi smiling warmly, exchanging not only pleasantries, but also a level of comfort that suggests trust forged through years of trade, oil, and energy deals. Now add Xi into that mix. China's leader, speaking firmly against what he called bullying behavior, urging for a new, multipolar order where the global south has just as much weight as the West. The visuals from Tianjin were more than just optics. They were a live demonstration of how alliances are being redrawn in real time. Why does this matter? Because when Russia, India, and China sit down together, the world's financial arteries pulse differently. Together, they account for more than a third of global GDP, hold immense reserves of energy, and influence the lives of billions of people. The handshake between Modi, Putin, and Xi wasn't just a gesture. It was a message to Washington, to Brussels, and to every capital watching. The old rules of the global economy are being questioned and perhaps rewritten. Let's break down what happened. She spoke about creating new financial institutions under the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Think about that. A parallel banking and development system that could reduce dependence on Western control bodies like the IMF or World Bank. Putin doubled down on energy partnerships, reminding everyone that despite Western sanctions, Russia still has willing buyers and strategic friends. And Modi, representing one of the fastest-growing economies on the planet, reinforced India's unique position, working with Russia for energy security, while carefully navigating its complex ties with the United States and Europe. But the optics go beyond economics. The body language, the smiles, the closeness, the almost familial warmth told a story of solidarity. It was as if they were saying, we have our disputes, yes. We compete, yes. But when it comes to challenging the dominance of the Western-led order, we are united. That is a message that reverberates across oil markets, trade routes, and even currency exchanges. So, as you watch the clips of this summit, remember, you're not just seeing leaders in suits on a stage. You're seeing the outlines of a new economic order being sketched, one handshake, one smile, one speech at a time. Yesterday may have looked like diplomacy, but in truth, it was a declaration. A declaration that the global economy is entering a new chapter, and the script is no longer written solely in Washington or Brussels, but also in Moscow, New Delhi, and Beijing. And trust me, this is only the beginning. Now, before we dive deeper into what this meeting actually means, let's take a step back and understand the platform that made it possible: the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO. Because this wasn't just a random get-together of three powerful leaders. It was part of a much bigger, much more strategic story. The SCO began in 2001 as a small regional security bloc, mainly to deal with border stability and terrorism concerns across Central Asia. Back then, it was easy to underestimate a loose coalition of China, Russia, and a handful of Central Asian states. But fast forward to 2025, and the SCO is no longer some quiet regional club. It has grown into one of the world's most influential multilateral organizations, stretching across Asia, the Middle East, and even into parts of Europe. At yesterday's summit in Tianjin, nearly 20 leaders gathered under the SCO umbrella. Heads of state, prime ministers, presidents, and observers from countries that, together, represent more than half of the global population. That's right, over 4 billion people are tied, directly or indirectly, to the SCO. When this many leaders meet in one place, the ripple effects are felt everywhere, from Wall Street to oil markets in the Gulf, from African trade corridors to Asian tech supply chains. What makes the SCO unique is that it isn't just about security anymore. It has become a comprehensive platform, mixing politics, economics, infrastructure, and energy cooperation. You could think of it as a counterweight to Western-dominated organizations like NATO, the G7, or even the European Union. While those blocs were designed to project Western power, the SCO is increasingly projecting the power of the global South. And that is where the shift in the global economy becomes crystal clear. For example, in recent years, the SCO has been expanding its membership aggressively. India and Pakistan joined back in 2017. Iran became a full member in 2023. And more countries across the Middle East and Africa are applying for observer status or partnerships. The bloc isn't just growing in numbers, it's growing in ambition. And with China offering development loans, Russia providing energy security, and India bringing its massive consumer base, the SCO is turning into a genuine alternative pole of global influence. Think about this. The Western world has long set the tone for global finance through institutions like the IMF and World Bank. But at the SCO, leaders are openly talking about creating new financial systems, new digital currencies, and even alternative payment networks to bypass the dollar. That's not just talk. That's a direct challenge to decades of Western financial dominance. So, when you see Putin, Modi, and Xi sitting together, they're not just representing their own countries. They're sitting on behalf of a bloc that is becoming the heartbeat of the global South, a bloc that wants to show the world that there's another way to structure international cooperation, another way to share power, and another way to build the future. And that's why this summit matters. The SCO is no longer in the shadows. It is stepping into the spotlight as a serious player in the global economy. And the rest of the world is watching very closely. Now, let's talk about China's messaging at this summit, because it was impossible to miss. President Xi Jinping used the SCO platform to push a very clear narrative. The world needs multilateralism, not domination by a single power. He didn't name names directly, but his reference was obvious. This was a critique of Western, particularly American, influence. She spoke out against what he called bullying behavior in global politics, framing China as a defender of fairness, balance, and equality between nations. This isn't just rhetoric, it's positioning. China wants to be seen not as an aggressor, but as a builder of an alternative system where the global South has a louder voice. And here's where it gets even more concrete. She pledged billions of dollars in loans, aid, and development assistance to SCO members. That means infrastructure, energy, digital technology, and even green finance could soon be flowing directly from Beijing into countries across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. So in essence, China's message was this: we will fund growth, we will fund development, and we will fund an alternative to Western dominance. And that makes Beijing not just the loudest voice in the room, but perhaps the most influential. Now let's break down the real substance of this summit, the agenda, and its economic implications. Because while the handshakes and smiles make headlines, the actual discussions reveal where the world might be heading next. First, Russia and India's energy and trade relationship. Despite pressure from Washington and new waves of U.S. tariffs, Prime Minister Modi made it clear India is not backing down from its energy partnership with Russia. He reaffirmed strong ties, stressing that India will continue sourcing Russian oil and gas to fuel its booming economy. President Putin, in turn, praised what he called a principle-based strategic partnership, meaning a relationship that isn't swayed by Western threats or shifting sanctions. This is hugely significant. Energy is the lifeblood of modern economies, and by sticking with Moscow, India is signaling its economic autonomy. It's saying, we will decide our energy future on our own terms. For Russia, meanwhile, this ensures a steady market despite isolation from the West. Both sides win, and the message to Washington couldn't be clearer. Sanctions don't isolate, they simply reroute. Second, security and strategic signaling. President Putin used the stage to hammer home one point. NATO expansion must be addressed if there's to be any lasting peace in Ukraine. This wasn't new rhetoric, but saying it at the SCO matters. He's shifting the conversation from a bilateral Russia-West conflict to a multilateral stage where sympathetic countries are listening. At the same time, Xi Jinping echoed a very different kind of global vision. He called for a democratic, UN-centered world order, which in plain terms means reducing U.S. dominance in international institutions. But Xi didn't stop at words. He pushed for concrete SCO development tools, a dedicated bank, green energy initiatives, and digital platforms that could rival Western systems. If even part of that materializes, it could reshape how emerging economies borrow, build, and innovate outside the grip of the IMF or World Bank. Third, India-China rapprochement. This one might have been the quietest headline, but could prove the most important. For years, India and China have been locked in tense border disputes, with soldiers literally facing off on remote mountain ridges. Yesterday, Modi and Xi both committed to cooling tensions, resolving disputes, and, here's the key, reviving trade and connectivity. Direct flights, frozen since the pandemic, are set to resume. Trade corridors could reopen. The symbolism here is powerful. Two Asian giants, historically suspicious of each other, now finding common ground in the name of economic growth. If this thaw holds, regional integration becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Put all of this together, and here's the picture. Russia finds markets, India secures energy, China builds institutions, and the SCO strengthens its role as the economic engine of the Global South. Each leader had a different agenda, but all three agendas pointed in the same direction: greater independence from Western control and greater cooperation within Asia itself. That's the kind of shift that doesn't just shape headlines, it shapes the future of the global economy. So what does all of this mean beyond the headlines? Let's zoom out and look at the broader impacts on the global economy. Because the Tianjin Summit wasn't just a gathering of leaders, it was a showcase of the world shifting into a new gear. First, multipolar momentum. For decades, the global system has been shaped by U.S.-led alliances, Western institutions, and a unipolar balance of power. But the SCO is showing us something different, a coalition of major powers that are building their own centers of gravity. Russia, India, and China, standing together, represent a third of global GDP and a huge share of global population. Add in Iran, Central Asia, and other partners, and you get a bloc that can no longer be dismissed as a sideshow. This is multipolarity in motion. Instead of one dominant voice, the global economy is being pulled in multiple directions. And that means new opportunities, but also new uncertainties. Second, economic decoupling and alternatives. Look at what's happening on the ground. China is offering billions in loans, aid, and infrastructure projects to SCO members. India is doubling down on Russian oil imports despite sanctions. These aren't isolated moves. They're deliberate steps to reduce reliance on Western systems. When Beijing finances development outside of IMF structures, when New Delhi ignores Washington's tariffs, they're signaling, we don't need permission to grow. This creates an alternative economic architecture, one where the Global South doesn't wait for the West approval to build railways, highways, ports, or power grids. Third, energy realignments. Energy has always been the pressure point of geopolitics. But what India is doing, securing Russian oil despite Western pushback, shows how resilient commodity flows can be. Sanctions don't stop energy, they redirect it. Oil tankers once bound for Europe are now sailing to Asia. Gas pipelines that were cut off from the West are being rerouted eastward. And the SCO Summit reinforced that these realignments aren't temporary. They're becoming permanent features of the new global economy. That has knock-on effects: cheaper energy for Asia, higher costs for Europe, and a less predictable global market. Finally, institutional innovation. This is where Xi's vision comes in. A new SCO bank, AI cooperatives, and green energy platforms may sound like bureaucratic jargon, but the implications are massive. Imagine a world where developing nations no longer turn to the World Bank for loans, but to a Beijing-backed SCO fund. Imagine digital payment systems designed in Shanghai or Moscow, not New York or London. These are not just financial tools. They are instruments of sovereignty. They allow countries to grow without being tied to Western conditionalities. And that, over time, erodes the dominance of the dollar and the euro. Put it all together, and here's the reality. The global economy is no longer a one-way street controlled by the West. The SCO is part of a larger movement toward multipolarity, decoupling, energy realignment, and institutional innovation. Yesterday's summit in Tianjin wasn't a photo op. It was a preview of the world to come. And the question isn't whether the global economy will change, it's how fast. As we wrap up, let's step back and see this summit for what it truly represents. Putin, Modi, and she didn't just show up for another round of diplomatic handshakes. They didn't just pose for the cameras, wave at the crowd, and then fly back home. What they did in Tianjin was something much bigger. They sketched a blueprint for the future of the global South, a vision of how the world's economic order could be rebalanced in the decades ahead. Think about it. These three leaders together control vast energy resources, massive consumer markets, and some of the world's fastest-growing economies. Their decisions on trade, finance, and development ripple far beyond their borders. For countries in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, this summit sends a signal. There's another pole of power, another pathway to growth, another network of partnerships beyond Washington and Brussels. Now, the question remains, was this a turning point or just symbolic optics? Will the pledges of cooperation translate into real institutions, new pipelines, shared currencies, and functioning development banks? Or will it remain a carefully staged show of solidarity, powerful in image, but weak in execution? That uncertainty is exactly why the world is watching so closely. Because if these initiatives gain momentum, we're not just talking about small adjustments. We're talking about a multipolar economy, one where power is shared across continents, where emerging markets no longer play catch-up, but actually help set the rules of the game. So, what do you think this means for emerging markets and for the future of globalization? Drop your thoughts in comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you found this breakdown useful, make sure to hit that subscribe button because we'll keep diving deep into how geopolitics reshapes our economies.